What's up, dudes? I used to watch this show back in the day. It was like my favorite show. It's called Hey Dudes. I don't know if you guys remember Hey Dudes. So funny. Anyway, I think the girl who played in it was the girl, the pretty girl. I think her name was Kelly something. I don't remember. But she was from, I think it was that same girl that played in Saved by the Bell. And the one who married the comedian Ben Stiller, is his name Ben Stiller? His wife. And his wife reminds me of Christina Applegate, but it's not the same lady. She played in it as well. Anyway, that is so off topic. But today, I'm coming to you guys because this is an introduction to the chart reading we're going to do. So we're going to do a chart. We're going to take a look at, and we're going to study Pablo Escobar's chart. So we're going to take a look at Pablo Escobar's chart because I just happened to be sitting at home watching. I've never watched Narcos from beginning to end. There's a lot of Narcos I haven't seen. So I was sitting in the house just because I was sitting in there with nothing else to do. I was coming from a workout, or early morning workout, and I was like, okay, let me check out Narcos. I mean, I know it's good. I've caught a few episodes, but I haven't really seen a lot. I've only seen like a couple of episodes of it, and I've seen them all out of order. So the repeats are on back to back. So I've been in there watching the repeats of Narcos. And I said, wow, there's a lot of people in this world who you would never know their name. There are billions of people in this world. So there are people in this world, like, you're never going to know who they are. You're never going to know their name. You would never even know that they existed as humans. You know what I mean? But there are some people who, their names are just worldwide and world renowned, whether it's during the time where they lived or after they died. They're just world renowned people. And people like Pablo Escobar, who most of his reign and most of the time which he lived within was not during when we had social media. So social media doesn't even make a difference. Yes, you find out who people are more now, but we still had things back in I don't know when the telephone was invented, but back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we still had telegrams, telephones, and things of that nature, all up until the TV was invented. And then when the TV was invented, of course, information passed more quickly and free-flowingly, and you got the visuals. Oh, and we had radio. So, we had radio signals and things like that before the TV invented. But, of course, when the TV was invented, information became more widespread. So, in watching Narcos, of course, Pablo Escobar, and one thing I want you guys to understand about this astrology channel is it's really not a judgment of good and evil. It's really not a judgment of who's good and who's evil. It's really just a straight up look at people's astrology charts and zodiac charts. And I've realized, I was telling a friend, the more you live, the older you become, the less naive you are to what goes on in the world, is the more you realize like evil has just as much of a right to exist and reign in this world as good does. Because if it didn't, it wouldn't exist to the extent that it does. And I know nowadays with social media and things of that nature, when we see a lot of the things that go on, whether it be racism or people that get killed that have nothing to do with racism. So whether it's domestic violence or terrorist acts, maybe it's religious based, you would just understand that, evil has just as much right to exist in this world as good does. Because even if you look back in the times of the Viking or the Crusades, or even, even though there are some populations, I don't want to turn this into like a race video or anything like that, so I don't want to get into who is more brutal, what race is more brutal than another race and all of this. But I'm just saying, throughout centuries and centuries, no matter what race it was, I mean, death and destruction have been a part of history. It's as much a part of history, and maybe even more so than the good acts and things like that have happened in history. So taking a look, I think Pablo Escobar's chart is something, and when you take a look at the charts with me, you just make notes about these particular signs, elements, and things like that, their natures, whether, mutable, fixed, or water or fire, things of that nature. It's just for you to take note and start to understand how true the energy from the zodiac and the cosmos and the stars really is. It isn't to paint a picture of any particular zodiac sign one way, because in order for people to be notorious across the world, to where they're a household name just about, you have to have an element of various things that add up in the chart. So as you understand, when we get to talking about Pablo Escobar, yes, he is a Sagittarius, but which is a mutable sign. And I know, I think we've talked about this before. There's a list that's floating around of serial killers and things of that nature, where they have been, all of the killers on this list have been mutable signs. Now, it wants further study. I've done no research on that list and who put it together. I believe it's just based on their sun sign, which is, the sign that most people know. Those who skim the surface of astrology only know their sun sign, and that's what you get when you read horoscopes and things like that. A lot of people don't know what their moon sign is, or their Mercury, or their Saturn, things of that nature. Excuse me, guys, I'm putting on my shoes. This introduction is a car chat, so I'm about to go into the store. So, I haven't ever done any research into how that list was compiled and put together. And I'm of course, if you take many people throughout time and throughout history who have killed people, been serial killers or mass murderers, or have had, I guess, what we perceive as a very evil persona and a disregard for human life, we might see that mutable energy in more than just their sun sign. So I'm sure that list is much bigger, and there's some other signs on that list, but it's not particularly a person's sun sign. It could be, you could have heavy energy in a mutable sign that isn't particularly your sun sign. So I don't want all mutable signs, all Gemini, Virgos, Pisces, and Sagittarius is to go crazy. No, all of you aren't crazy. Not every mutable sign is a killer. It really, the point I'm making is, when you look at astrology and you look at charts, it really is about the totality of a chart, the aspects it's making, the fixed stars that it's next to, and of course we're going to take a look at the critical degrees and the satanic degrees. You guys know I strongly believe in the satanic degrees and the critical degrees, so we're going to look at those as well. And 9 times out of 10, unless you're born at the same time as somebody, or within like a minute or something, you're not going to have anybody who has the same zodiac chart. You may have people who have similar zodiac charts. There are certain, the outer planets are more so generational planets, but things are going to be at different degrees, and degrees are very important in the chart, and they matter. So, like, for instance, in my generation, so people who were born in my generation, I'm in my 30s, they're going to have certain planets that are in the same sign, but at different degrees. So they're going to have their Pluto in the same sign. They're going to have their Uranus in the same sign. So you're looking at people who have, I believe it's going to be the Pluto in Libra, Uranus in Scorpio, those planets that take a long time. Neptune, you're going to have a lot of people who have their Neptune in Sagittarius. You're going to have people who have those outer planets in the same signs, because those planets take years, double-digit years, just about to move. But it's going to be at different degrees, and where the degree that you have a planet on and the aspects it's making to other things in your chart, fixed stars and things of that nature, critical degrees, is going to affect how your life plays out as a person. So you can never just chalk someone up to being a certain sun sign and say, oh, this is how they are and this is what's going to happen. When you're trying to diagnose the character of a person, or you're trying to predict things, or you're really trying to understand the psyche of a person, you really have to look at their whole chart in its entirety. And I'll put that list of the serial killers. I've mentioned it in videos before. I don't know if I've ever put the list up, but I'll put the list up. And I'll say that to say, just so you guys can see where we're going to be, how that plays into Pablo Escobar's chart. Before we actually take a look at his chart and start talking about some of the signs that he has his planets in, and the degrees and the aspects and things of that nature, I just want you to understand, he has a good bit of Sagittarius energy. So he has that mutable energy. And he had his sun in Sagittarius, his Chiron in Sagittarius, and his Mercury in Sagittarius. And I mean, they're all like damn near right on top of each other. I think his sun and his Mercury are I know they're less than 10 degrees apart. I want to say his sun is at about 12, his Mercury at 14. They're somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees apart. So, his sun is burning his Mercury, which isn't necessarily a great thing in astrology. And he's got his Chiron there. He does have some placements in Virgo. And then we'll talk about some things that he has in Capricorn that made him the hardcore person that he was. And guys, also stay tuned, because I'm going to be back on camera soon. I know you guys miss my lovely face if you've ever seen it. So I'll be back on camera soon. I really want to hop back on. Seems like everybody wants to be on camera these days. It's just much easier for me to do a voice video, because when you get on camera, you want to at least look somewhat decent. And the next chart that we're going to take a look at will be Margaret Sanger. I figure with all of the abortion laws that are going on right now, all of the abortion bills and changes to the abortion laws that are going on right now, it would be a good thing to take a look and do a case study on Margaret Sanger and look at her chart. I was talking to my Scorpio girlfriend about Margaret Sanger, and she had pulled up her chart and pointed out some interesting things about her chart. If you aren't familiar with who Margaret Sanger is, and this is something that really sways my thought process on the whole abortion thing and the laws that are changing, is because she was inhumane and she was a racist, and that is who started Planned Parenthood in 1916. So she was an inhumane racist, and if you knew that you're getting abortions done by inhumane racists who really wanted to wipe out populations of African Americans, Orientals, people who are born with mental retardations and things like that, I mean, it might change your opinion on how you feel about abortion, but then again, it might not. So I think it's worthy to take a look at that. And also, just an interesting fact about Margaret Sanger that I said, hey, this is crazy, especially because I was looking at Pablo Escobar's chart. I mean, this is literally like a couple of minutes ago. I had brought it up and I was telling her about Margaret Sanger, and she's like, oh, I gotta look her up. I gotta see if what they're saying about her being racist and all this is true. I said, oh, it's facts. You can go look it up. And then when she looked it up, I guess she was just like, oh, she was such an inhumane, terrible person. Let me see what sign she is. So when she looked it up, Margaret Sanger was a Virgo. And we just talked about mutable energies and how, I mean, it seems like they have no problem doing, someone with heavy mutable energy may have no problem with inhumane acts such as murder and killing people, and have no sense of humanity to them at all. So with that said, guys, stick around. Let's get into Pablo Escobar's chart. Hey, everybody. Let's take a look at Pablo Escobar's chart. So, I know most people probably don't like to watch videos that are hours and hours and hours long. So, I'm going to try to be as to the point with this video as I can. But there's so much that we could cover about Pablo Escobar. But I'm going to try to touch on some of the main things that stood out to me about his chart. If you are looking at the at the screen at the computer now, and let me just make this bigger because when I screen record it looks pretty big, but maybe to you guys it's not as big as it could be. All right, so let's just do that. Hopefully that is big enough for you guys to see. So I had Pablo Escobar's chart up. He was born on December 1st, 1949 at 11:50 a.m. and he's a Sagittarius. And the reason, I know you guys listened to the introduction, so we're going to hop right in. But Pablo Escobar, for better or for worse, for good or for bad, was larger than life, which makes a lot of sense with him being a Sag sun. And, you know, with Pisces being his ascendant. If you guys are looking at his ascendant. So I was looking at his chart and I was just making some notes. And one of the things I came up with Pablo, and one of the things that interests me, I know the fact that he was a drug dealer and what you want to call a criminal, and the fact that he, you know, he killed a lot of people. I mean, they're estimating he killed like 4,000 people. So he just knew no bounds for his for the method of his madness. So he also killed a lot of people. But you guys, if you take away a lot of these terms and you really look at life in a realistic way, when you talk about your government, when you talk about any really large corporation, when you talk about a lot of the rich and famous as well as infamous people in this world, and Pablo Escobar was most definitely infamous. In this world, they deal in a certain level of death, destruction, and things of that nature. Like I said, if you want to just take your government for example, you know, we can talk about how Pablo Escobar killed 4,000 people, which is a terrible thing because you're talking about men, women, and children and things of that nature. But I think we tend to think criminals only do that. You know, governments go to war and kill tens and thousands of people. When we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, I believe 100,000 people were killed. When you talk about corporations, some of these big drug corporations and things like that, I mean, pills, medicine, pharmaceuticals, they kill tens and thousands of people. So you have to kind of keep in mind and try to look, when we're doing a case study like this about people, I try not to have a lot of judgments. I mean, of course, we all have our own moral character, but again, I try to look at it with a subjective mind frame, and I try not to have too much judgment. So we're going to talk about some of these things, and we're not glorifying any of those things. The same way we don't glorify I wouldn't glorify when the government goes to war and kills hundreds and thousands over the course of years, probably millions of people. Same thing with pharmaceuticals, the cell phone companies that are causing cancer with the cell phone towers, radiation towers, and all this kind of thing. So just take it with a grain of salt and try not to be too judgmental when you look at people who you might deem as criminals or things of that. Because I feel like I was saying to a friend of mine the other day, it seems like, and I said it in this introduction, I believe, it seems like evil has just as much of a right to exist as good. And it seems like there's, in every angel, there's a little bit of devil. Like you guys always see, the angel on one side, the devil on the other, but it all makes up a whole. So jumping into Pablo Escobar's chart, I say he was larger than life because when you take a look at his chart, first of all, he's a Sagittarius. He has a Sagittarius sun. And one thing that you may note, so if you guys are looking at this chart and you're not familiar with looking at astrology charts, you can see his ascendant is over here. That's the sign that was on the horizon when you were born. And his ascendant is in Pisces. So Pisces was on the horizon when Pablo Escobar was born. Now, he is a Sagittarius sun. And his sun is in the 10th house. So I believe his sun is at like, what is it? His sun is at 9 degrees of Sagittarius, and his MC starts at 8 degrees and 51 minutes. So it just made it into that 10th house after that medium coeli in the right there at that 8 degrees and 51 minutes. So having his sun in the 10th house, his sun is right there conjunct Chiron, and it's making a little bit of a wider conjunction to Mercury. So the sun is at 9 degrees of Sagittarius, and his Mercury is at 14 degrees of Sagittarius, which is still a conjunction. I mean, it's within 10 degrees. So it's not that wide of a conjunction. It's not that tight of a conjunction. He has a tighter conjunction between Mercury and Chiron, and then the sun and Chiron, because Chiron sits right in the middle. So if you're looking at his chart, he's got his sun right there. He's got Chiron right here. So the sun is right here. This is where the 10th house begins. Then the sun is here. Then he has Chiron, and then he has Mercury. So it tells you that he has a very, very strong Sagittarius energy. And you know, the term larger than life, it absolutely applies to Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a fire sign, so that automatically represents passion. You know, someone who is not afraid to show themselves, to show off, and things like that. So he had those things in his 10th house, the 10th house of public image and career and things of that nature. So whatever he did, it was bound that he was going to be known. I mean, I would say even famous, because Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter. And if you take a look at his Jupiter, which I'll get to some of these things, because if I have to do this in 2 parts, I will. I really don't want this to go over about 45 minutes to an hour, but I do want to talk about his planetary placements, and then I want to talk about, of course, you know, I love the critical degrees and satanic degrees, so I want to talk about some of that, as well as the fixed stars. So we'll try to get to all of that in this video, and if we have to do a part 2, we'll do a part 2. So with Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, and with Jupiter being the traditional ruler of Pisces, and then Jupiter sitting at the 0 degree of Aquarius. So his Jupiter is at 0 degrees and 9 minutes of Aquarius. It just bounds to tell you it tells you that he was bound to do something big. He was, and because these planets are sitting here in his 10th house, he was bound to be known or famous in some way, most likely relating to something very different, something off the cuff, something you wouldn't normally, you know, think was something that's not normal for someone to be famous for. And because that 0 degree of Aquarius, I mean, any sign, any planet that's between that 0 and 1 degrees, that marks something significant in the person's life and in their chart. So with that ruler of his sun sign, which is Sagittarius, and it being a traditional ruler along with Neptune of Pisces, you know, that Jupiter sitting at Aquarius is a big deal. And as you know, Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. Aquarius is scientific thought, is forward thinking. Aquariuses are definitely all about money. You know, they're about their money. They're about making their money or getting their money through whatever means they can. So if in Aquarius isn't above or below stealing money or taking money, you know, or using others to get their money. And with Pablo being really, I don't know if he was the biggest, but if he wasn't number 1, he was definitely in the top 3 biggest drug dealers in history. So besides the government, so you know, one of the biggest drug dealers in history. So you can see how that expansion of Jupiter, again, Jupiter ruling that ascendant and Jupiter ruling that sun. And most importantly, that sun being placed in the 10th house. You can see how this person was larger than life. So that's what I mean when I say larger than life. And that's what you can look at in the chart to really kind of see that and that significance. Because you know, with Jupiter sitting at that 0 degree of Aquarius, it's going to have a strong influence. And it's going to have a strong significance. significance in a lot of the things that Pablo Escobar did. And we'll also take a look at that. We'll look at some different facts about Pablo Escobar once I get through some of the placements and just give you my interpretation of how I looked at his chart. I want to just look at some of the facts that are published about him online and some of the things that are said about Pablo Escobar. So that in I know even if you're watching this video and you guys don't get, a lot of people might not get the technicalities of astrology, all of the technical aspects and terms that are used, and you might be looking at this chart thinking, what the hell, all these lines may be confusing you. But the important part to understand is just to take note of some of the descriptions that I give about the signs and the planets, and when it comes to numbers and degrees. So you don't necessarily have to understand astrology. You don't have to understand this chart to get it. But you will take with you some of the things that I say about the signs, the planets, and the degrees. And you can apply that. You know, a lot of times if I listen to people who talk about people's charts, or if I'm looking at a chart, I apply a lot of that stuff to my real life or people I know. Like, okay, you know, this describes a certain characteristic or whatever the case like that. You know, I know somebody like that, or let me pull up this chart. So astrology gives you, it gives you forewarning. It lets you know how to deal with people. It lets you know things to look out for and things to be aware of. And if you're also looking at my screen, the legend is here just to show you if you are interested in astrology and you want to try to follow me as I go around the chart. You do want to, here's the legend over here so you can understand what some of these lines from planet to planet point are. The squares, the quincunxes, the sextiles, the oppositions, the trines, and then minor aspects in the gray. So I'm just going to tell you some of the things that stand out to me off top, and then I'm going to go through some of my notes, which may get a little repetitive. Anything repetitive, I'll skip over. So before we go too deep into that, again, Pablo, let me just tell you a little bit about Pablo Escobar. I talked to you about him in the introduction, but just to give you a couple of facts about Pablo Escobar, a couple of pieces of information. He, like I said, if he wasn't number one, he's definitely in the top three. But you pretty much, majority speaking, they say he was the most powerful drug dealer in history. Arguably the most powerful drug dealer. But, you know, more than 50% of the people will say he was the most powerful drug dealer in history, which he had formed the Medellin cartel, and he was the head of the Medellin cartel, which was a cartel of drug dealers. He comes from a farm family. His father was a farmer, and he began his life of crime pretty early. So he was into a lot of things such as smuggling, stealing radios, stealing tombstones to resell them, and different illegal activities like that. So a lot of things that had to do with theft, robbery, and smuggling. So a lot of things that had to do with being in disguise. And and he was doing this before he got into the cocaine industry, as the cocaine industry grew in Colombia. And what would happen is they would get the cocoa paste from Peru, and that would come into Colombia, and then Colombia was, you know, synonymous with cocaine. The biggest, they would get the cocoa from Peru and then make that cocaine and do what they had to do with the ether and everything that goes into it, which they used to buy huge amounts of ether from America. So, and in Colombia became synonymous with cocaine. And it's funny, I had a girlfriend who was from Colombia. I mean, this was probably about 10 years ago, 10, 11, 12 years ago. And she was one of the coolest friends I ever had. I mean, you know, just a really, really cool girl from Colombia. And I wish we had remained friends. I would have liked to go to Colombia and check it out. And just to point out some of the girlfriends that I have had, I've had a girlfriend from Colombia. And then I have a girlfriend. It's funny, she's a Capricorn. And I still talk to here and there this day just to see how she's doing, check up on her. Her son is really big in soccer. She's from El Salvador. A lot of people from South America, a lot of the women that I've met have been some of the coolest women that I've ever met. I got a lot of love for those women that I have met from Colombia and El Salvador. So anyway, when we talk about his smuggling and stealing and things like that, I want to point out how he has Pisces here on his ascendant. So his ascendant is at 3 degrees, 4 degrees and 9 minutes in Pisces. So a lot of times with that ascendant in Pisces, and I know this really does come off in the 10th house too. So I'm equating it to the first house, because first house and the ascendant is how people see you. And the 10th house is also your reputation and how people see you. So Pablo Escobar has his ascendant in Pisces, which is the first house, the house itself, your body, your image, your character, what you show people. A lot of people call it the mask, but I know a lot of astrologers who say it's not just the mask, like that's who you are. Some subscribe to that mask theory, some don't. They say, you know, the ascendant is the mask, and then when the person really gets to know you, they'll see more of their sun sign. So that's up to debate. There are many different schools of astrology, and you know, you have to formulate with your own intuition and knowledge when you do astrology. I would say in certain areas it's not always a set way. There are going to be different opinions when you talk about certain things. So even though this isn't Pisces on the 10th house, I have Pisces on the 10th house, and I know someone else, I know other people who have a Pisces rising. And what you'll notice with that Pisces in the 10th house and with the Pisces rising sometimes is there's an air of illusion. I mean, because this is with Pisces period, it is ruled, like I said, it's ruled by Jupiter, and it's ruled by Neptune. So the modern day ruler is Neptune, the traditional ruler is Jupiter. And with that Neptune is a gaseous planet. It has a halo of gas around it. So a lot of times you really don't have a clear picture of a Piscean person, or what you may think of a Piscean person if you're not looking really closely is not truly what that Piscean person is. There's a aura of a dreaminess surrounded around Pisces. Almost like a etheric angel with Pisces. Now, that could be the Pisces ascendant, the sun sign, because those are reflections of the self. Those are the images that one gives off. Or it could be if you had Pisces on that 10th house. And I know in my own personal experience, and I've had Pisces ascendants who can relate to this. There is something, and not that Pablo Escobar, and I'll show you guys a couple of different pictures of him when we read through some facts about Pablo Escobar. It's not that he was an attractive guy. I mean, there's nothing attractive about Pablo Escobar to me. If you guys have listened to some of my videos, and I didn't put once I get more likes and some more views on my first part of the signs that I think are attractive, I'll put up part 2, which of course Pisces is the last sign, so it's in part 2. And I mentioned in part 2, I mean, this is my personal opinion, I don't necessarily find Pisces, the majority of Pisces that I have met, physically attractive. Physically as far as their face and their looks. You know, some of the more attractive signs are the Venus signs, you know, your Aries, you know, things like that, in my opinion. You know, now have I been very attracted to Pisces before? I have. But it's almost like that alluding quality, that sexual quality. There's something like a moon maiden or a fairy, or there's just this nature about Pisces that can be alluring, and it may not necessarily be connected to physical attraction in the Pisces. But with myself on the 10th house, and I would go as far to say Pisces ascendants may experience this as well. With myself in the 10th house, and from what I see in Pablo's chart with that ascendant in Pisces, when people meet you, they can almost be enamored with you. They can almost be taken by you, whether it means taken by your beauty or just taken by your presence. Like I said, it doesn't always have to equate to someone who is the bomb or looks that great physically, or in the face, because Pablo Escobar absolutely didn't to me. I mean, some of you guys may have a different opinion, but not from when he was young and a little slimmer to when he got old, because he was never really skinny or slim. He always seemed to look to have a little weight on him, or have a fat face or something of that nature. But he's not necessarily physically attractive, but there's a presence about a person that has that Pisces on that 10th house and on the ascendant. And you can, there's something very intriguing about you that captivates and enamors people. And I experience that all the time. It's just something where people want to be around you. They want to talk to you. They want you to be a part of things. They want you to be involved. And it's really funny with me in particular, because I don't want to be involved a lot of time. I'm very particular and picky about my social circle, the people I deal with on a personal level. And a lot of my life has been finding ways to get out of social engagements and not be around people that I don't want to be around, or I don't know and I'm not familiar with, because people always want you to be there and be involved. And you may have a lot of associates, with placements like that. And with Pisces as Pablo's ascendant, the other aspect I want to talk about, as I talked about the smuggling and him being into theft and things like that, like stealing tombstones and reselling them. It is that illusion of Neptune. It is that illusion that comes with being like that Pisces fairy, where people might not know that you're doing something else under wraps. Like with Pisces, there's always seems to be some secret agenda or something they're keeping in hiding or out of plain sight, because Pisces is not one that is just going to tell everybody its most personal secrets or things that they don't want people to know. Pisces is very good with you telling them information, you giving them all the dirt, you telling them everything they want to know, but they are very, very good with hiding some of their most personal business. With certain people who are less intuitive and don't really see what's going on. But the thing with Pisces and it being that mutable sign, the more it does it, the more it does it, and the more it does it, it's like eventually it gets caught, somebody finds out. But that might not be for a long time. They could be doing something and you could suspect it, but you just don't have any proof. And that's one of the things with Pisces on it's an illusion. Just like that Neptune and that halo and that smoke and that cloud, it's everything of an illusion. So that's a good tidbit about Pisces on his ascendant, and that may tell you why he was able to do get out of here. It's always something, like why now? To do what he popping up on the screen, to do what he did for such a long time, and even though when he was found out or people knew what he was doing, it was very hard to take him down. I mean, he even had gotten to a position in government before his exploits were revealed. And you would think somebody making that kind of money in a place like Colombia, which is not Medellin, Colombia, which is not one of the richest nations in the world, the richest countries in the world, or whatever Colombia is, someone making that type of money, you would think their money sources and income sources would have to be very legitimized or documented before they could do that. But in a country like that, you pretty much can probably pay your way into certain positions of prominence and things of that nature, which is how he survived for so long. And what I talked about Pisces, with Sagittarius in that 10th and with Pisces on that ascendant, just having many acquaintances and connections and things of that nature. So also when he got into the cocaine industry and smuggling, because you have to remember a big part of the drug industry is smuggling. America was like, I think he supplied America with 80% of their drugs. So 80% of the cocaine in America, and I'm willing to say the number is probably higher than 80%. I had to turn the fan off. The air's kicking in. So 80% of the cocaine supplied to America was from the Medellin cartel. It was from Pablo Escobar. And that was going on around the 1970s. That's when he founded the crime organization known as the Medellin cartel. And also when I talked about just his associations and things like that, if you take a look, it's funny, I took all of these notes because I didn't want to freeform it, but just talking about him, I'm going to end up freeforming this anyway. So if I get repetitive when I go through his planetary placements, we'll skip over it. But in order to form that Medellin cartel and operate a business, a cocaine business and a drug business that big. Oh, also, before I move on to what I'm about to say, also take note that he has that ascended in, well, we'll get to it. I'm sure I'll get to it. Well, no, I'll say it now. Also take note, with his ascendant in Pisces, again, I would venture to say he has two chart rulers or it depends on which, if you're an astrologer or if you're into astrology, which one you truly deem, or which planet you go by, traditional rulers or modern day rulers of a sign. But I can look at it both ways. We can look at Neptune being the chart ruler, because the planet that rules the ascendant is going to be the chart ruler. So if he had any soul depositors, so planets in the sign that they rule, I also would consider those very, very heavy energies. But looking at this and looking at the signs that rule Pisces, so we talked about Jupiter being the traditional ruler and Neptune being the modern day ruler. His ascendant is in Pisces, and Neptune is over in his 8th house of Libra. And what that'll tell you, just off the bat, with me seeing his Neptune in Libra, that tells me someone who is the judge and juror over death, someone who has no qualms about making decisions such as putting that bomb on a plane that killed 100 people, putting that 200 and what was it, like a 220 something pound bomb in the city. I believe it was in Medellin that he did that. And I mean, he killed hundreds of people in the city with that bomb. So, Scorpio, he is no stranger to the dark side, and being one with making those decisions to take life, and just the judge and juror of who to kill, or when somebody has to go. He had no issue with that, with his Neptune being here in Libra, and Libra is on his 8th house cusp, which is the house of Scorpio. So he has Neptune in the house that Scorpio traditionally rules, which is the 8th house. So there's going to be a lot that goes on with him about having good, probably, instincts, intuition. He probably, who's to even say if he has psychic premonitions or things of that nature with Neptune there. Though they could have been clouded, and he could have had certain thoughts and things that weren't planted or based in reality, as you see the way he killed a lot of people. But at the same time, with Neptune being up here in Libra in the 8th house of Scorpio, he also was a man of the people. I believe over like 25,000 people from the poor people of Colombia came out to his funeral, because there was a time where he was known as Robin Hood. From the drugs that he sold and things that he did, he gave back to the poor communities, the churches, schools, and things of that nature. So there was a certain population of the people who had love for Pablo Escobar, which is, very fitting for Libra, who is ruled by Venus, the planet of love. Libra, who usually is a sign of friends. Libra will have a lot of friends. They know how to Libra is represented by the scales. They know how to play both sides. They know how to balance different friendships. They know how to stay, a lot of times if two friends are arguing, Libra will remain neutral in the argument. Libra is not one that always is going to pick side. Libra likes to remain neutral. So that says a lot. And then that being in the house of Scorpio. So that 8th house, even though Libra is on the cusp and he's judge and juror and of all these friendships, it is really a house of death and destruction, rebuilding, regeneration, and it deals with a lot of life and death things, inheritances from other people, and things you get from other people. And all of his money was made from the drugs he sold and the money that he got from other people. And then if you want to take the other thing about the Pisces and the Neptune, it talks about drugs and things like that. And just from what I've seen portrayed in the movie and what we know Pablo liked, he liked his weed, he liked his drinks and things of that nature. So he definitely was into his drugs. And the biggest thing of all, he was one of the biggest drug traffickers in the world that has ever been known. So that says a lot for Pisces to be the sign that rules drugs. Pisces and Neptune rules drugs, alcohol, sicknesses, institutions, prisons, jails, and all of that that was Pablo's life. That was the major thing of Pablo's life, dealing with institutions such as the police department, government bodies such as the police department, jails and institutions and things like that. And then we're going to talk about something really funny when it comes to, his home becoming his jail, which he does have Uranus down here in his 4th house of, Cancer's on his fifth house cusp, but it starts a little bit before that fifth house cusp starts. If you look down here, he has Gemini on his fourth house cusp. His fourth house, which is right here, it starts in Gemini, but where his Uranus is placed is in Cancer. And then his fifth house cusp starts a couple of degrees after where that Uranus is. So his Uranus is in the fourth house of Cancer. And when he had turned himself in at one point in his life to the Colombian officials, he made his home his jail. He had built his own lavish jail with casinos. I mean, that man was living it up. You can call it jail if you want. He may not have been allowed to leave, but that was his home. It was not his jail. And if that isn't the most Uranus and Cancer thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. So again, it's funny just to see that he has Pisces on that ascendant. I mean, that has everything to do with drugs. Not only did he like his drugs, that was how he made his living, and he was one of the most successful people in that line of business that we've ever seen in our history, in our time. Well, in anybody's history and time in this world. And then if you look at Jupiter being the ruler of the chart, Jupiter at that 0 degrees of Aquarius, and Aquarius being on his 12th house. So Jupiter is actually in his 11th house. His 12th house cusp does not start, and let's just make sure of that. Let's just see. Sometimes those lines get on my nerves. So his Jupiter is at 0 degrees Aquarius, and let me see where his 12th house cusp starts. His 12th house cusp starts at 3 degrees of Aquarius. So his Jupiter is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, but it's in his 11th house, because Aquarius doesn't start until 3 degrees. And you can see that right here, because Jupiter comes before the house cusp, which is this dotted line. So this is the 12th house. So, I mean, the Jupiter in its 11th house, which Capricorn is on that cusp of the 11th house. And we'll talk about Capricorn because he has his Venus there. But the 11th house is like, they almost say it's the part of your chart where your dreams are going to come true. It's your friendships, your associations. And he had a wide association. He had a wide network. He made his money. Jupiter expanded that. And Capricorn is on the cusp. Even though that's in the sign of Aquarius, it is in the house that Capricorn is on the cusp for him. And Capricorn is all about business. It is about government. And Pablo, his life was dealing with government officials, whether he was I think they said on the Medellin cartel's payroll, they spent about, I don't know if it was 1 billion or more than $1 billion. And this was in the movie Narcos. They spent at least $1 billion, I believe it was a year, on bribes. So at one point, he owned the telephone company, not owned it as in he was the owner, but they bribed these people who own these places. So if they needed to intercept a phone call, tap your lines, if certain calls and communications were going back and forth, between people or certain people, they could get that call, they could tap your lines. I mean, they knew what was going on. They bribed the public officials. They bribed the government in Colombia. So, for him to have Jupiter at the 0 degrees of Aquarius in that 11th house, it just goes to show you how much his business expanded and just blew up through his association, through forming a cartel. It wasn't just him. He worked with other huge drug dealers, such as the Ochoa brothers, Juan David, Jorge Luis, and Fabio. And he served as the head of that organization, which is very fitting with Jupiter in that 11th house. And he focused a lot on the production, transport, and sale of the cocaine. And his reach was far reaching. So it's very fitting also for him to be a Sagittarius and have that Sagittarius sun in his 10th house. And most of his business was done with America. It was done with the USA. That's why the USA had such a hand in taking Pablo Escobar down. That's why they had such an investment into taking Pablo Escobar down. So he had a lavish estate where he lived. He had a lavish estate with farm animals, hippopotamuses. They say his hippopotamuses still roam the land to this day, and they have actually helped the ecosystem and environment. So he had a 7,000 acre, estate in Colombia where he had giraffes, hippopotamuses, camels, and other animals. And he also funded different projects to aid the poor. And like I said, they used to call him the Robin Hood or compare him uh, to Robin Hood. And that perception, again, when we talk about the mask that Pisces can wear, the mask of the ascendant, the illusion that can be Pisces, the perception of his Robin Hood is what won him the election to an alternate seat in Colombia's Congress in the year of 1982. So I find that is very, very interesting, and it shows you how hand in hand in certain countries, and even in our countries in the United States, that some of these drug dealers and government, I mean, it's just two different sides of the same coin. It's just which team are you working for, and nobody, can outdo the government. Once you start becoming bigger than the government, which is easy to do in some poor countries, because there are rebels. The government doesn't have the control in those companies like the government has control in, or may have control in, the United States of America. So that's just a couple of things about Pablo. But there was a lot of bloodshed and things like that. So before we talk about the bloodshed and the people he may have killed and things of that nature, let's talk about the fact that he has Venus in Capricorn up here in the 11th house. So again, it tells you that his love and his focus was with what he was passionate about, which was the Medellin cartel, his drug business, living lavishly. Like I always say, Capricorn is the keep up with the Joneses sign. Capricorn has to have the biggest diamonds, the most flashiest car, the nicest house. Like, you're not gonna outdo a Capricorn. And with Venus in Capricorn like that, I mean, that is just what Pablo was about, and he gained those things through his associations. And I'm willing to bet he was a hardcore lover. He wasn't the type that always communicated. A Gemini friend and I, shout out to the Geminis, happy birthday to the Geminis if you're watching this. But a Gemini, and here's the Venus in Capricorn sitting here in his 11th house, and that Venus is at 25 degrees and 53 minutes of Capricorn. So almost towards the end of the Capricorn house. So that tells me someone who has a very good business acumen. Someone who knows, and again, Capricorn represents government. And you see how he wanted to be a part of the government. And that's another thing with Pisces. So not also only does Capricorn represent the government, but Pisces a lot of times are politicians. I don't know. I live in Maryland, and I don't know, in the Baltimore area. And I don't know if you guys, we had a whole thing going on with our mayors, like the last 3 female mayors and things like that, one stepping down, and the other 2, Sheila Dixon and Mosby, the one that's in there now, like them being kicked out because they stole some gift cards or was peddling children's books to business associates. Just bullshit, small bullshit that other races of people have been in office and probably done far worse, and it's never been exposed, or they were never outed for those reasons. But a Scorpio friend of mine had brought up the interesting fact that 2 of those mayors are Pisces, and I believe one is a Sagittarius, if I'm not mistaken. I think Mosby was Mosby the prosecutor. I can't think. Whoever the man that's in there now, because you guys know I pay attention to politics, but I don't. And just at this particular time, I cannot remember her name. The man that's in there now that was peddling the children's books, like conflict of interest crap, and she had to step down out of office. But I believe her and Sheila Dixon are Pisces. And then Rawlings, who did not run for another term, I believe she's a Sag, if I'm not mistaken. But the point is, there were 2 Pisces, and Pisces do like to get involved with politics. Pisces are very smart. They, even though they're a water sign, they are thinking in a mental sign. So I mean, Pisces is Virgo's opposite. So even though the detriment or the fall may be, Mercury may be a detriment or fall there because of all the watery emotions, it's got an aspect of that Mercury coming right back across to it. So I find that Pisces are very smart. And it's got the knowledge and the wisdom of those outer planets, with having two outer planets as its ruler, Jupiter and Neptune. So with his Pisces, he was into politics and he really wanted to be the president of Colombia. That's what he wanted to be. But of course, he was ousted from that seat once the true dealings of his business and how he made his money came about. So I find that interesting with him being a Pisces ascendant and really having a passion to want to be involved in politics. And then with his Venus being over there in Capricorn, which is the same house Jupiter is sitting there in the 11th house, that really was his passion and what he aspired to. He wanted to be the president of Colombia. He wanted to be in the government. And Capricorn, it represents government, and it represents business. I mean, a hardcore businessman. Pablo Escobar was a hardcore businessman. He had no love for them hoes. I mean, there was no love with Pablo. It was deep down in there for his family and his kids and things like that, which his wife, and I tell my Gemini friend all the time, you need you a Sagittarius. She said, I never date Sagittarius men again. But I believe his wife, now I had a hard time finding her birthday, but I did see it posted on a few sites that she was a Gemini. So that just goes to show you how much, no matter what you think, because people can have their opinions. Opinions are like assholes and everybody's got them, but fact is fact, and it really can't be reputed. I knew before when I saw he was a Sagittarius. I said, well, let me go find his wife sign. Before I even found a wife sign, I knew she was going to be either Gemini, Virgo. I mean, she could have been a couple of other signs, but my first two picks were Gemini and Virgo. And what do you know? They're saying the wife was a Gemini. Even more interestingly, the mistress was a Virgo. So his mistress, who was the reporter, like I said, he had associations. His Venus is here in Capricorn in the 11th house, and his mistress was a reporter. Which is really interesting. So Pablo got a lot of his business through his associations, his social clubs. I mean, he had a mistress that was a reporter. So, that is someone who has a high social ranking in that country and things like that. How someone is on TV and things you do for the world and things of that nature, your philanthropy. And like I said, there's a time when he was known as the Robin Hood. That's what got him into government. So he was highly viewed in a lot of different social arenas and social clubs and things like that. He had a lot of associates, business associates. To run a business that big, I mean, you really would have to. So that I find that that's very interesting with him having his Venus in Capricorn. And Venus is in Capricorn. It's a no bullshit Venus. It is not a person who, there may be some sensitivity coming in from other areas. Capricorn really have a heart deep down inside, not so much like a Virgo or a Gemini who doesn't have heavy Cancer placements or something like that, where they really can, that Mercury has no feelings. That Mercury has no feelings. So if you listen to my introduction, we're going to talk about Margaret Sanger, who was a Virgo. I mean, they can make malicious decisions with no feelings. You know what I'm saying? Because that Mercury is not worried about the feelings. Mercury is all about that thought, that simple process of analytical and analyzing in data. It's not taking a whole bunch of feelings into consideration when you talk about Mercury and Mercury ruled planets. You would have to have some other aspects and some other planetary energy in some other areas. And again, so that makes a person who got no love. I mean, they got love, but it's for particular individuals, and those particular individuals can get very deep into his heart. Like if you watched, some of that stuff for Narcos is embellished because you gotta trump up TV a bit. And I know Pablo's brother and even his mistress, the Virgo mistress reporter, had a couple qualms about there being some things that weren't true in the way they were depicted in the film. Like in the film, they depict the reporter the Virgo mistress being killed, you know, and all of that, and that didn't happen. I mean, she went on to live. So there are some things, there's some dramatization that is there, but for the most part, I believe it's an accurate depiction of of you know, what went on during those times, as the officers, the two American DEA officers that were involved in the takedown of Pablo Escobar, contributed to the making of Narcos. So, also with that, no love for government, no love for authority figures, no love for the powers that be that were in control with that Venus and Capricorn. Pablo, they were known to kill government officials. I believe he also killed a few judges. So, you know, he had no love. I mean, that was a hardcore person right there. And he didn't care if you were the police. And they killed, I believe they killed thousands. Of police officers. You know what I'm saying? And it was really nobody who could hold Pablo Escobar until some of his cohorts and his associates and his business partners had kind of turned against him when he let off that 225, whatever it's called, bomb over in Colombia. You know, it was a point where he had just gone too far, as a Sagittarius can. And as a Pisces can, you know, he had gone too far, and, you know, people had started to turn against him. So, you know, when that happened, that's when they were able to kind of take him down, because he really wasn't left with too many people supporting him after that. So that's some good information about his chart. So now I'm just going to go through, let me go through my list of placements and just talk to you about some of the notes I had down, just thinking about his placements. Number one, we could just say he had that, we talked about how he had that stellium in Sag. So that Sag is a very, very powerful energy. That Sag, and a lot of times Sages can be very dominant. Sagittarius can be a hard-headed sign where they're not listening to what a lot of other people have to say. Sagittarius can also be politicians. That's a profession that you might see a Sagittarius into. Sagittarius can be involved with foreign assignments, because if you think of the glyph for Sagittarius, so not the glyph, but just the character that symbolizes Sagittarius, it is the half man, half horse, who is shooting his bow and arrow far and wide. So whereas Sagittarius' opposite sign of Gemini is more local, so Gemini is like your local communication, your local travel, your short distance. Your Sagittarius is your long distance, your far distance, your foreign animals and things of that nature. And again, like I said, most of his business was done in America, in a foreign land. And also, people who are Sagittarius, like I said, they're half man, half horse. They are concerned, as well as over here in Virgo with his Saturn in Virgo and his Mars in Virgo. They're concerned with the welfare of animals and jobs related to animals and taking care of animals. And like I said, everybody knows about Pablo Escobar's free roaming hippopotamuses. They said they're still there to this day. And he had a lot of animals on his property and things of that nature. So that's really interesting. And with Jupiter being the ruler of Sagittarius, again, it indicates commerce. He was a businessman. He made Forbes list, I believe, 7 years in a row. So this huge drug dealer, drug trafficker, he was one of the richest men in America one of the richest men in the world. Excuse me, how dare I say America? Even if he didn't live, he's not from America, but not just was he one of the biggest in his own country or even in America, he was one of the richest men in the world. So, Sagittarius can be someone who was involved in commerce and trade. He did a lot of trading of drugs. He did a lot of bartering of drugs. He did a lot of trafficking of drugs. Things having to do with money lending. Again, he was known as the Robin Hood. He gave out money. He gave money to support certain causes in his neighborhood. And again, it involves people with politics, judges, things of that nature. So, he had a lot of involvement, a lot of bribes going on with the government. And to have stellium in Sagittarius with his Mercury, I mean, that just adds to the level of his communication and how far reaching his travels were having that Mercury in Sagittarius, and the amount of business that he did and how intelligent he was in doing his business and how expansive he was in his business, and how that Jupiter there being the ruler of Sagittarius. So, you know, that being there, that 0 degree, he really was expansive in everything that he did. And I'm willing to bet with that Jupiter being one of the rulers of his chart, if you go by Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces, and his Pisces is ascendant, he was one of the biggest. Jupiter can expand whether good or bad. So you don't have to have Jupiter, although it is a benefic planet, benefic meaning it is a planet that tends to bring good, or is thought to be a positive planet, and not a malicious or malefic planet, a negative planet. Jupiter will expand negative if that's what you're giving Jupiter to expand. So Jupiter doesn't have, it's almost how they say the universe doesn't know whether to give you the good or bad. It's going to give you what you're asking for the most, what you're subconsciously thinking about the most. That's why the power of manifestation and law of attraction, it takes a lot of meditation and changing the way your mind thinks, because the universe can't discern between the good or the bad. It's just going to give you the energy that you're putting out. It's the same thing with Jupiter. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. If Jupiter's there and is next to it, it's going to expand it. And as you can see, between the Jupiter and Capricorn, they're making a conjunction as well, because the Jupiter and the Venus are making a conjunction as well, because the Venus is at 25 degrees of Capricorn, and like we said, that Jupiter is at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So it's 5 degrees away, and his business, his pleasures in life that were related to his business. So Venus is what makes you comfortable in life, the pleasures that you have, the things you love, your sensuality, all of that came through his business and the money he made, and Jupiter expanded it as big as it's ever expanded anybody's riches. Again, he was one of the richest men in the world. He was in Forbes for about 7 years in a row. And having that stellium in Sagittarius just makes him a foreign businessman. It means his business and his communication and his persona, with that being in the 10th house, and his reputation was far reaching. It reached far beyond Colombia. He was infamous. He was world renowned. So those are some things to really that you can see in the astrological chart, especially with this 10th house with Pablo Escobar. So that's one thing. We talked about the ascendant in Pisces being able to move in and out and blend in and out of different circles, being able to do things covertly and underground. He had Pisces is a water sign. It is the fish that swims deep. He had submarines to traffic his cocaine. He used to have money or cocaine in the tires of airplanes, and things like that. It's said that some of his pilots made $500,000 a day. $500,000 a day. So he was able to move about. And also in the looks of Pablo, he was a round-faced man. I believe that Pisces kind of had that fish look. So, and he had a round belly. And I know a lot of Pisces who may be slim with a round belly, and that was Pablo's builds. And I know a lot of Pisces who are short. I probably know more Pisces who are short than tall. And if they're tall, they probably have something else on the ascendant, and they're a Pisces. You know, they were Pisces sons with something else on the ascendant. So Pablo Escobar fit that description pretty well. And another thing I would say for Pisces in general, even though we're talking about Pisces ascendants, they're smart, they're cunning, they're sneaky, they're able to do things behind your back. And then Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and that is the sign that rules drugs. Again, he was the biggest drug trafficker, one of the biggest, arguably the biggest drug trafficker that has ever existed. And Pisces can also be about love affairs. A lot of times Pisces will have love affairs. They don't know a lot of boundaries. Pisces don't like being controlled and kept in any boundaries. They like to do their own thing and have their own program. And then another thing to take note of, and that's why I said we might have to do this in 2 parts, because there's so much that I could say about Pisces Escobar. There's a list, and let me Google this list on my other screen. There's a list that floats around that I've talked about in several videos about, and I mentioned it in the introduction, about mutable signs being serial killers. And you want to keep in mind, he has heavy Sagittarius energy. He has a stellium in Sagittarius, meaning 3 planets in Sagittarius and Sag being his 10th house. So the energies, and he has very strong energies of number 1, the Pisces and the Neptune, and then the Sagittarius. Both of those signs, Pisces, and then also I'm to me he has strong energy over here in mutable Virgo because he has his Saturn in his Mars in Virgo, which is his 7th house, and 7th house is the house that's opposite from the first. So those are angular houses. Those are very important houses: 1, 4, 7, and 10. So those are the strongest houses in a chart. So he has a strong 7th house with Saturn and Mars there. Pisces on the ascendant, even though he doesn't have any planets in the 7th house. He has a very strong 10th house. And then he has notable energy in his 4th house, which is the Uranus. Also, his father was a farmer. He comes from a farming family. And the 4th house can also represent agriculture and farms and things like that. But I think an interesting point to make with him having, out of all of the energy in his chart, he's probably going to have the most immutable signs. So we can see he has 1, 2, 3, the Sun, Chiron, and Mercury in Sag. So that's 3 planets right there. The ascendant isn't a planet, but it's a point. So I'm going to count the ascendant. That's 4. And then he has 2 in Virgo. So he has 6 planets in mutable energy. That's a lot of mutable energy. And there was a list that was floating around where it was talking about mutable signs being a lot of the serial killers in history. So I'm just pulling that list up now, and then I'm going to show you guys the list that I'm talking about. And in a way, I mean, when Pablo Escobar had to solve a problem, he had no problem, which it doesn't surprise me with his Venus there in Capricorn. You know, he could be very cold-hearted, and with the Neptune, his chart ruler over here in Libra, in the 8th house of death, which is Scorpio, he had no problem making decisions to take people's lives. He had no problem making a call to put a bomb on a plane, to blow people up, women, men, and children, or to, kill people. You know, a lot of people wouldn't do those things. They would need to, kind of, they would think about things before they went to kill somebody and things like that. But he had no problem doing that. So, and he has a lot of mutable energy in his chart. So it just speaks to the fact of how. So I was saying it to say, I would venture to say you probably could call him somewhat of a serial killer. You could at least call him a mass murderer. And like I said, there's this list that's been floating around of all of the the serial killers that have been mutable signs, and it's been some of the most noted serial killers in history, or that we know of. So I want to find a list. There's a list that has it all, and I posted it on my, let me see. I don't know why I typed it in mutable signs of serial killer. Let me put list, because I just want that list. I should go to images, because then it'll probably give it to me without me having to type it in like this. But let me this one called Mutability and Murder. I just want you to see a history of some of the mutable signs. Okay, so I didn't find the extensive list that I'm talking about, but we can start out with a smaller list. And this list is actually pretty good because it talks about where the placements are. So let's look at this. And I think I have it up in another page. Let me see if this other page is going to give me, because it's a longer block. It's a longer list than this. So I'm looking for the longer list. All you crazy ass mutable Sagittarius, Virgos, Geminis, and Pisces out there. Oh, there's such a long list on here. So let me see. Let me see if I got it on another tab. We can just look at this one I have up, and then you guys can Google, or when I go to put this video together, because I'm not going to do any edits on this. I just have to, I did my introduction on my phone. I just have to send my introduction to my computer. I'm going to add the introduction, merge the videos together, and then I'm going to post it. So I really don't do any editing. I may add an introduction. But if you just want to look at some mutability and some of these signs, I don't know why it's hard for me to find the actual list. List. 1 second. Let me try one more thing before because you guys can just look at this. I mean, you're looking at the screen, so you can look here. And let me make it bigger for you. Because I just have a feeling this is going to come out smaller when I go to post this to make the video. Doesn't appear as big as you guys as it does to me. List of mutable signs, serial killers, astrology. I just want the simple list. This time I'm going to go to images, because I don't want to be fooling around with searching for this thing forever. I know we're at an hour. Okay, bam. I knew I should have went to images because I found it. So here's the longer list. And we'll look at this one in a second. We'll look at this one. But let's look at see if I can get this bigger. This is on Reddit. So before we look at this one, let's look at the other one I pulled up. So David Burke, it says a popular picture has been going around the internet for years now, pointing out the trends in zodiac signs between famous serial killers. All the killers on the list were one of the 4 mutable signs: Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And I will tell you guys, I'm willing to bet, and we'll go in and we can look at some of these folks' charts, that a lot of the placements of the sun, Mercury, or whatever these planets that are mutable were probably next to tragic fixed stars or very negative fixed stars and things of that nature, or on some critical or satanic degrees. But we can do that study. I need you guys to leave comments. Let me know what you see. Let me know what interests you. Like I told you in the beginning of my video, I'm a person, I'm all about good and doing positive things, but I've come, the older I get, I realize it seems like more evil exists in this world, and there's just a level to me that wants to understand it, and there's an interest that I have in it. So I want to do more studies on it. Tell me who you want to hear about. The 2 charts that I had coming up, just as a segue, a little commercial break, a reminder, are going to be Margaret Sanger, I think we're going to do next, or it's going to be Big Meech, from the Black Mafia family, who I find very interesting. I was thinking he was a Cancer for a long time, and he is pretty part of Cancer because he was born at the 29th degree of Gemini, which is very telling, seeming as though where his life is gone and the things that he's been through. But to break up the monotony of the heaviness and all of this evil, say, crazy stuff, we may do Big Meech before we do Margaret Sanger. So if there's somebody you want to see, somebody out there that you're interested in, that we all can take a look at their chart, there may be famous or notable names that people would know, just comment below and let me know. And of course, comment your feedback. I need to know what you guys think and all of your feedback to the video. I try to answer every one of my comments. If I don't get to your comment, I do apologize. You can always email me at tarothelpnow at gmail.com. You can email me at EarthSkystarshop at gmail.com. So, but put the comment below, because 9 times out of 10, I'm going to respond to you. So it says all the killers on the list were one of the 4 mutable signs. And while there are plenty of outliers, so that's what you have to take into consideration. And that's why you want to look at these people's charts individually. That's why I mentioned fixed stars, critical and satanic degrees, because you have to look at that kind of stuff. It's not just because your sun is in Virgo or your Mercury is in Gemini. It depends on what's going on there. And a lot of times there are specific alignments of the planets and the fixed stars. So it might not be so terrible if your sun is next to a fixed star, but say your Mercury or your Venus is there. That might have a much more negative effect in your sun. So it all depends. And I have a really good reference. If you guys are interested in any of the references I use, like on one of my last videos, it was like, where are you reading these from? And I put the link to the satanic degrees. I have no issue giving you guys the references because I want you to go check it out for yourself and to learn as you're watching this video. Just take something with you. It says, while there are plenty of outliers, there is indeed an interesting trend in mutable dominance in serial killers. And here's some well-known examples. And what I'll say about the mutable signs, it's because you guys do have that changeability. It's because you guys can go either which way. You are not fixed and set in your way like a fixed sign, and you aren't all about leadership and starting something off and beginnings and leading things. You can kind of go either way. Mutable energy can change, and mutable energy can be volatile. So that is a big basis of why you may see a lot of mutable energies and prominent mutable planet placements in those who are serial killers who have performed some heinous acts in history. So you have David Berkowitz. He's a Gemini sun, and his Mercury, a Gemini sun, Mercury, and Mars. So he has a stellium in Gemini of his sun, Mercury, and Mars. A lot of mutable energy, and to have the Mars there, yeah, that's a lot. And I believe David Berkowitz was the son of Sam, if I'm not mistaken. Ted Bundy, another serial killer, he had his sun, his moon, and his Mars in Sagittarius. So I'm starting to, as I go through this list, you're starting to see a trend where not only did these folks have one planet there, but they're having stelliums. And I've said in my videos before, if you have, a lot of astrologers will say you have to have 3 or 4 planets to have a stellium. To me, if you have 2, that kind of starts a stellium, and 3 is a definite stellium. So it's once you start to have, several planets in a sign, which I consider a stellium. Jeffrey Dahmer, I'm sure you all are familiar with Jeffrey Dahmer. He had his sun and his Mercury in Gemini. Albert DeSalvo had his sun, Mercury, and Venus in Virgo. John Wayne Gacy, he had a Pisces sun, moon, and Mercury. He had a Gemini Mars and a Sagittarius rising, and then a Virgo midheaven. Oh, that's difficult. And make note with Pablo Escobar's chart, he does have that Sagittarius midheaven. So not only does he have 6 signs in a mutable sign, he has 2 mutable signs on his IC, on his MC, and on his IC, and what's the other one called? His DC. So he has mutable signs on all of his most powerful houses. All of his angular houses he has mutable signs on. So it's no wonder to me that he killed quite a few people, and he was world renowned and infamous. Then you have Ed Gein. He had a Virgo sun, a Gemini moon, and he was a Sagittarius rising. And as you can see, just the rest of the list, I'm not going to go through each one. So, it's really crazy when it comes to looking at that, the studies that are put together about people who have this mutable energy who have ended up being serial killers or murdering, like, a lot of people. So, and then if you just want to take a look, I'm not going to go, I don't know why I did that. I'm not going to go through this list in detail, but I just want to give you a close-up look of how many more are on this list right here of serial killers in there. I believe they are just listing the sun sign on this one. So you just look through as all of these here. So I thought that was a very and I believe Ed Gein is from Silence of the Lambs. I believe he's the dude in Silence of the Lambs, if I'm not mistaken. And he was notorious in Silence, the Silence of the Lambs guy, for eating people. He had a very strict mother who didn't let him deal with females and things like that. So he was eating people, saving their organs, he had a drum and different things in his house made out of skin. He was using a human skull as a bowl in his house. So just some crazy shit that was going on. So that just gives you an idea about the mutable energy. And then the sun and Sag, it's a person, like I talked about, who can't be controlled, can't tell them what to do. They cannot be held down and things about that. And they're not so stuck in their emotions and being all subconscious about emotions and things of that nature. He had a moon in Aries. So I can speak from personal experience. His moon and his north node is in Aries in his second house. So he's going to have a lot of passion and drive when it comes to his money, because he has Aries on that second house cusp. But Taurus is the original ruler of the second house. And the second house is about your money, your value, how you view yourself, and things of that nature. And Pablo viewed himself in very high regard. There was a point in the movie, in the Narcos, not the movie, but the Narcos series, where his wife was telling him, if you turn yourself in, the people will view you as Nelson Mandela. So, he wanted to be viewed as a person who stood for something, as a person who was notable. He wanted to be viewed and go down in history, but he wanted it to be as that Robin Hood, as a good man. And his North Node was right there fueling him towards that. It was all about money. I mean, he has a North Node in the house that's about money and making money and riches and values. So he had his North Node in the moon there. So he was very passionate about that. He was very passionate about those things. And I know someone, actually my sister has her moon in Aries, and moon in Aries can be very, very passionate people. Moon in Aries people can be very hot tempered. They can get, aggressively mad really quick, and they can be over it just as quick, but it will stay on the mind. They may go back and later say, now they're over it. They're not in that state of anger that they were when they got mad. So mad they can knock your head off. You know what I'm saying? And then later they'll get over it, and they'll still say to themselves, I can't believe a person did that. So it doesn't, they don't forget. You know what I mean? They might get over it, but they don't forget. So very hot tempered, and things like that. So very passionate and fiery emotions, with that being there in Aries. And I would say a very strong mind, and a money minded person, because if I'm not mistaken, and I may have this wrong, it may be the other way around, you guys can look it up. Mercury, although the moon is the feelings and things like that, all of these things come from the brain. So Mercury rules a part of the brain, and the moon rules a part of the brain. I believe Mercury rules like the outer part of the brain, and the moon rules the inner part of the brain. Or I may be incorrect about that. You just got to Google that. But the moon does rule part of the brain and things like that. So I would say a very money-minded person, and a person who was very focused on their money and things of that nature. And his North Node is making an opposition. If you guys look at this blue line here, this is the North Node. His North Node is making an opposition to his Neptune in the 8th house. So when it comes to just his money and his purpose in life, and him striving to be needing to be more independent, needing that power, because the North Node is what you're supposed to be working towards, and the South Node is what you're coming from. I believe he didn't achieve that purpose in this lifetime, because he was very much so stuck in that Neptune in Libra South Node in the 8th house, because a lot of his actions came from that place. Although he did step into his North Node some, because he was, Aries is always the me first sign. Look at me, gotta see me, and very smart. So he did step into that a bit, but he carried a lot of his South Node with him. And then we talked about the Mercury up there in Sag. We talked about his powerful communications, and him speaking, him being kind of a person of the people, then thinking he was a sort of a Robin Hood and things like that. So I'm not going to spend too much time, because a lot of this I've already covered without going to my notes. And then, so up there, guys, that is his Mercury in the 10th house in the sign of Sagittarius. I'm sorry about that. And then when you talk about Venus in Capricorn, like I said, a hard lover. Love is second to business. Love involves business. Business is pleasured and tied to the government. The government invading your personal affairs could have a lot to do with that Venus and Capricorn in the 11th house. The love, they may love to get their money. So a person with their Venus and Capricorn, they love to get their money. They're about their money. So let's talk a little bit about the Mars and Virgo. And I could speak from personal experience with the Mars and Virgo because my Mars in my chart is in Virgo. It is not in my 7th house, but it is in Virgo. So with Mars and Virgo, that can make a very passive aggressive person. And again, that Virgo is mutable. So I believe that that is what drove a lot of his heavy-handed, hard-handed ways. And with Virgo being ruled by Mercury, there's no feeling there. There's no sensitivity to it. They can say off with your head and not think twice about it with that Mars there, and it's very passive aggressive. And because it's an immutable sign, Virgo, that is the type of person you would have to watch out for, because you may think it's all good, but you may not know what you're going to get from this person from time to time. You may not know exactly what you're going to do to piss this person off, because Mars is subdued. It's not, Mars in Virgo isn't functioning at its best. Like, it's not to say it's a detriment or anything, but the nature of Mars in that heavy earth sign, it cannot express all of its aggression right off the bat like it would in a sign like Aries, which it rules, or something like that. So that Mars, while it's very analytical when it comes to work and health, so that helped him have, because 7th house is this house of relationships, partnerships, marriages, open enemies, and things like that. The 12th is your hidden enemies, so it's open enemies. So he had a lot of enemies in business. Like I said, part of what brought Pablo Escobar down was his business associates turned on him and traded on him. That is what he lost, some of those associations. So that's a karmic lesson right there with Saturn there. Saturn helped bring that in, and with Mars there, he probably had a lot of passive aggressiveness. So he might have been doing things to get back at people that you might not have necessarily seen coming. He's not always a person where you necessarily saw his anger coming, which speaks a lot to the bombs in the car, the bombs in the planes, and things of that nature. Things that you wouldn't even know are there that's going to take you out. Uncontrollable moods, sneaky. Their will cannot be watered down. A strong will, a hardcore will. So, what they will to do and what they're passionate about, they're going to do. It's probably a person that's hard to talk out of things that they really, really want to do. And I would say some OCD involved when it comes to his enemies and who he thought was against him. And it could also represent OCD when it comes to his partnerships and the people that he dealt with. And I believe he was with his wife for about 17 years and his mistress for quite a while as well. So, if you were in his life, whether you were enemy or partner, he had his eye on you. He knew what was going on with that Mars and that Saturn there in the 7th house. He's probably a controlling person, probably like to control his partners and his business partners alike. You often probably meet the representative. Like I said, you may not know the real nature and the real passion of the person until you get on their bad side or until you get on their good side. Because if you got on their good side, maybe it's nothing that they wouldn't do for you, but it's something that may be covered in it may be covered. It may not be something that you realize right off the bat with this person. And then you may realize you're dealing with a person who may not be the best type of person, who may not treat you the best in the long run. Now, with his Saturn in Virgo making a very tight conjunction towards Mars, so his Saturn making a tight conjunction to that Mars, it could be imposing its will on that Mars. I mean, it's a less than a 1 degree conjunction on that Mars in that mutable planet of Virgo. And I would be willing to say that Saturn is stronger than that Mars there. And with that Saturn there, lessons and downfalls through partnerships and business associations and open enemies. The government was his open enemy. The police was his open enemy. And those things, like I've said before, were his downfall. Some of his partnerships were enemies that could have possibly been hidden. He had a hard head. I believe that makes for a hard head. Does not reason with enemies or loved ones. Hard to reason with. Is his way or the hard highway. He was probably a hard to please type of person and ran his things with an iron fist. So that's one of the things that came to me. And also, he could be, like I said, OCD when it came to the people that he dealt with, or those that he was close to, or in business partnerships to. OCD about, hey, are you trading on me? Are you on my side? Who was really for him and who wasn't. So then let's talk about Uranus in Cancer. So he has Uranus down here in Cancer. So I believe that it's really going to speak of some transformations and some things that he goes through over time that have to do with his home life. Some instability there, some loss or some breakup of the early home life. And one thing I could say about some Aquarius is I know they may have left the home early. They are the type that's not afraid to venture out and getting into street culture and hit the streets at an early teenage years. They are the type that knows what's going on. A lot of Aquarius as teenagers may have run away from home, or they may again, my sister and my cousin, who I call my brother, are Aquariuses. When we were young, now both of them they're about the same age. They're 10 years older than me. And when we were young, my mom is from North Carolina. Her family is from North Carolina. So every year they have a really huge family. We used to go to North Carolina to these huge family reunions. Me and my two other cousins that I call my brothers, which are twin Libras. My mom is a twin Libra and her twin has twin Libras. I'm surrounded by fucking Libras. So we used to all go out of town. My dad, all of us, we gone. We leave out of town. And sometimes because my cousin was a little older, so like if I was 9, he was 19. So he would stay at home and my grandparents raised him. And my grandparents would be out of town too, because my grandparents had raised him on my mom's parents. So he would be out of town. And it wasn't until I was older, like not too long ago, found out like when we be out of town, like he used to live in the area of the city where a lot of people like that area was jumping in Baltimore City. We found out when he was gone, he told us he would be having huge house parties. Like they would move. I would never think of doing something like that in my parents' house. Now I would go to a friend's. Now when I was in high school, I had friends who their friends had money. Like her father was the owner of Sweetheart Cup Factory, and the headquarters used to be, or the big building used to be here in Baltimore County. He used to be the head over there. So they made money. I mean, you're talking about they living out in a big house back in the woods with the pool. That's why I said, people, if you don't know Baltimore, you got to know the difference between Baltimore City and county. I live down the street from the Ravens camp, live around the corner from Superstars. So we live in a pretty prominent area. And her parents used to go out of town. And I will go to the house party. We threw house parties, but it was at somebody else's house. And we did not invite those kind of people. The damn Aquarius will move all my grandmother's furniture to the basement, and they would have them house parties like the movie House Party. I was like, I can't believe it. I can remember times when my sister used to sneak people in the house. We were running around the house beating each other with belts. My sister would be out in the street. She got whippings for coming home at the 12 midnight by my father. So Aquarius is with the shits at a young age. They about that street life. So, with the Aquarius and everything like that, it's like they know with that Uranus, it does not stick to the code. The Uranus has to break out of the box and see what's going on and discover new things out here in the world. So he probably left his home. As you can see, he was into being a thief and things like that at an early age, at a teenage age, and that shows here with this Uranus in his 4th house. So a break from the home life, something unusual and non-traditional about his home life. And to become a thief and things like that, at a young age, that says a lot with that Uranus in his home. Probably something different about his father and things of that nature. And it seemed like Pablo always had a love for animals. Like I said, agriculture can be seen in the 4th house. And his father was a farmer. And it seemed like Pablo always had a love for that farming and animals and things like that, which started at a young age. And he was what was very different about him is when he grew up and he had his own home, it was very Uranian. He had animals and free roaming hippopotamuses in his own home. So there probably were a lot of changes early on in his life, in his own life. His father could have been ahead of his time with his thoughts and his beliefs, maybe possibly his mother as well. And Pablo could have believed he was forced to change. He wanted a better life and nothing was going to stop him here with that Uranus in Cancer in the 4th house. And although he has Gemini on the cusp, Cancer rules the 4th house of house and home. So, and it also can make a person who is of their people. And having Uranus and Cancer in the 4th house, as you see, he was what was called Robin Hood. Cancer is a nationalist. So that's a person who would take pride in their culture and their people and wanting to see them do better. So that was something that you could see right there with Pablo. Then let's see. What was I going to? And also, he was shot and killed, I believe, in his home or where he was hiding out at, which is crazy too. And I could see that with that Uranus there in that 4th. Then with his Neptune over here in Libra in that 8th house of Scorpio, playing judge and juror in others' lives. You know, he could have felt like he was owed, like people owed him, or you know, he was owed something. You know. And let me see, the 8th house, Neptune there in that 8th house is the 8th house of Scorpio is all about power. It is about a power. And with his Neptune there, it was such a cloud of that he didn't realize his illegal activities and him being the biggest drug dealer in the world, it was not going to get him the type of power. He had power in the underdealings, in the underworld. You know, Scorpio, that Pluto ruled house of the 8th house is the underworld. It's the underdealings. It is things like drug dealers and all of that kind of stuff. That's very much so 8th house Scorpio things. But with the Neptune, I feel like it really clouded his judgment as far as what he felt like he wanted to do, which was government and all of that. He thought he was going to be the president and is a very powerful person. But Neptune is what brought those false dreams and false realities, because someone like him, even if he had a rose to that prominence, it wouldn't have lasted for long. Not with you selling 80% of your drugs in America. You would have never made it as president. So a lot of delusions when it came there to who he really was and the extent of his power and how much his money that he got from other people. The 8th house is inheritances, money that comes into you from other sources, from, you know, what you've made your life career and the direction you've chosen to go with that Neptune imposing the North Node. He had some disillusion of how far he was really going to get and being seen as legitimate, using his drug money as his backing and his foot to stand on. With the North Node here in Aries, we talked about that, meant to be some sort of soldier. And I'm going to try to hurry this video up. I'm not going to go through all of my notes because I had 3, 4, 5 pages of notes, and there's no way I'm going to be able to get through all of this. But one of the very important things I wanted to point out about Pablo Escobar is when I took a look at his fixed stars and his conjunctions and oppositions with his fixed stars, a theme. A lot of what I saw when it came to his fixed stars was militant. And Pablo, I don't know why. Oh, I got my battery plugged into the wrong side of this. I don't know why one side of my power surge doesn't work anymore. Let me plug it over here before we go dead. And I still don't see my battery indicator on. So one thing about Pablo, I don't know what's up with this, guys. Oh, there it goes. One thing about Pablo is you could tell he was meant to be some sort of dictator, military enforcer. He was meant to deal in guns and steel. Oh, also let me mention, with the moon there in Aries and the North Node in Aries, Mars rules Aries. Mars is always all about steel, bullets, weaponry, military, firepower. It rules all of those things, and you can see how much of a prominence, like I said, bombs and the rocket, the gunpowder or whatever goes into making bombs and things of that nature. I mean, that's all Pablo. That's what existed in his life. A huge part of being a drug trafficker. Even your local drug dealers in your own neighborhood or the town or the city where you're from, like they tell you, it's two things that come to drug dealers: jail and death. Because the gun, the sword, the weapon, the firepower, it's a part of the game just as much as making that money and selling them drugs. And I had read something about, okay, let me read you this, that they said what they said about Pablo Escobar, which is really telling when I'm telling you, when I got to his fixed stars and a lot of his placements and the degrees in his chart, it just had military, guns, and firepower written all over it. I mean, it's the predominant aspect when it comes to Pablo Escobar. And something really funny about him is, let me read you this from Britannica. This is actually a chapter in Britannica, the encyclopedia about Pablo Escobar, and this is what was written. It said, however, such philanthropic works were offset by Escobar's well-known ruthlessness. So he was ruthless. With that moon in Aries, I talked about that hot-tempered Aries moon, and then that Sagittarius sun up there in the 10th house, and all this mutable energy. He was ruthless. It said he handled problems with plata o plomo. Plata o plomo. Plata-O Plomo, plata o plomo, meaning silver, which is bribes, or lead, which is bullets. So how he handled his business and his dealings was plata o plomo, either money or bullets. You either gonna get bribed, like I told you, they spent billions in bribes for the police department, the government officials, the telephone companies, airlines, all of that. Just imagine how much $1 billion is. Now, they said Pablo grossed, double-digit billions a year, but at least $1 billion was spent on bribes. And the saying, that characterized him, and the saying that he was known, and how he was known to handle his problems, was plata o plomo, silver or lead. You either gonna get down or lay down. You're gonna take the money, or you're gonna take a bullet. You're gonna take the lead. And with his planet placements and everything that I saw in his chart, it's just so funny how if you had a mind to look at some of these things while they're going on before they happen, you can pretty much see, what people, it really does lay out somebody's destiny and their soul, and what their life is gonna be about. Because I saw nothing. It's almost like every fixed star that he had a planet within 1 degrees conjunction or opposition from had to do with military. And military is all about guns, lead, and steel. So I found that very, very crazy. Again, and that's his North Node. That's where he's headed to. That's where he was meant to deal with in his lifetime. So he's meant to be a soldier, a fighter, a warrior for his money. It's there in the 2nd house. So 2nd house again rules money. So him being a soldier, a fighter, a warrior, when it comes to the bullets, the lead, like I just said, guys, I can't make this shit up. Plata o plomo, silver or lead. This is the house of silver. This is the house of money. The 2nd house of Taurus deals with money. And then he had his North Node there. Aries is on the cusp. Aries is the military. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars rules firepower, weapons, and all of that good stuff. So you couldn't make this shit up if you tried. So a lot of his fights were about money, wealth, comfort, love, and it was done. He had a love of brutality. He was hardcore. He had a love of brutality. I'm gonna skip over Chiron and Sag. He met his fate through foreign. Chiron, they say, it's a wounded healer, how you can heal your wounds and things like that. But I can't say that he necessarily healed his wounds. I think, he had a lot of things that had to do with karma and karma in foreign lands, enemies through foreign lands, and the karma of what the trouble that he caused and the things that he did. And again, if you look at that Chiron is in conjunction with the sun and with Mercury. Let's see. But in a way, it could have healed him being poor growing up, or just the poorness of his country. You know what I mean? So maybe the things that he did and the infamy that he had and the public image that he had. And when they thought, when they called him Robin Hood, maybe that was a way that he was healing. His Chiron placement was healing him in the different wounds and different karmic life cycles that he had been through. Like I said, who's to say nowadays what's right and wrong? Then let's talk about the Pluto and Leo, because the Pluto and Leo is a big deal. If you look here in his 6th house, you can also see why he was very successful, and he was successful through death and destruction. Pluto rules Scorpio. So Pluto is about gains and losses, being destroyed to rebuild. And if you look at his life, how he was confined to his house, even though it was nothing. They call it was supposed to be his form of going to jail, but it was nothing of a jail when he turned himself into the Colombian authorities. But how he would rise and fall, just all the different things he had to go to stay on top. The 6th house is the house of health and work and things of that nature. And he has Pluto there. So very transformative work, work that encompasses a lot of death and destruction, work that may deal in occult things, work that is very militant like. And with that Pluto and Leo, death from work, your work could be the cause of your death. With that Pluto sitting there, is what I would say. Drastic changes from work. He's been through many drastic changes. Public work that changes the course of one's life. So these were my own thoughts about these placements. Many ups and downs with work and health. As you know, he had a stomach, he had like that stomach going on. Wasn't necessarily good eater. He liked his marijuana and his alcohol. And one related to the other. Work tied into your health. The stress that came from work. I bet that he was inside a very lonely man. Even though he had all those people around him, a family and everything. And then just to touch on this Jupiter up here in 11th house at the 0 degree of Aquarius one more time, institutions, like those different social circles that he was a part of, whether it be government, he was known in government circles. He had the cohorts of drug dealers that he worked with and things like that. His name rang bells in different social circles and things of that nature. Let's see. And then, just that Jupiter ruling his ascendant and being on that 0 degrees, it really does speak of a drug dealer. It is right there. Let me see. What is his Jupiter? Is at the 0 degrees of that Aquarius, and his Aquarius house starts at his Aquarius house starts at 3 degrees. So his Jupiter is in a tight conjunction with his 12th house. The 12th house is, again, ruled by, he has Aquarius on his 12th, but the 12th house is naturally ruled by Pisces and Neptune. We talked about Neptune and Jupiter being the rulers of his chart. Neptune being drugs, and he was a drug dealer. And it's in a very tight conjunction with that house cusp. And he had a lot dealing with prisons and institutions and things like that. So it's very, very, very crazy. And also, let me see what I put for that Pluto in Libra. With Pluto in Libra, when I was, I don't know if this was something I had came across when I was looking through different things on the web, but I had made a couple notes that Pluto in Libra was someone who becomes popular, someone who may do, one second. Pluto and Libra, someone who becomes popular through their work. So, Libra is popularity. Leo is the king. That's what I say. He was the king of the drug industry, like the biggest drug dealer in the world. He was the king of the Medellin cartel. He was the Medellin cartel. He was the head of the Medellin cartel, and the cartel was his work. And like I said, death due to your work. And with the Jupiter at the 0 degrees of Aquarius, that could deal with, and being in a conjunction with the 12th house cusp, secrecy involving the job, that could relate to either hippies or militants, and he was a militant. And
also recreational drugs. And he was a drug dealer. So his whole business and his wealth and his infamy was built off of recreational drugs. Now, I'm going to run through. We're about to bring the video to a close. And what I'm going to do is because we had talked about his chart in detail, I'm going to run through. Well, before I run through these, I want to go through one site that I saw that had a couple of good facts about Pablo Escobar. So I want to take a look at that with you guys. And it was, and I'm going to run through them really quick. If you want the information, or if you want to take a look at it yourself and look at it in detail, you can go to allthat'sinteresting.com and you can take a look at it, because we're just going to take a look at 29 facts about Pablo Escobar. And before we do that, I'm going to run really, really quickly across his fixed stars and things like that. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to talk about some of the critical degrees very briefly and fixed stars very, very briefly. So let me go in my phone just in case I have to reference the critical degree chart and satanic degree chart. Let's do that. And fixed stars chart. So let me just get this up, guys, and then we'll hop right into these fixed stars. I have my notes written down, but just in case I need to refer back to it. All right. And this is the same resource I read from the last time. If anybody would like this link, just let me know down below in the comments. Let me take a sip, guys, because I've been talking nonstop with nothing to drink. Okay. So, before we get to this, why didn't it take me 1 second? Because I had already looked through this. Oh, why it just took me all the way to the end. Let me just start it over. But as I get back to number one, oh my God. Is it really going to make me page back to number one out of these 29 facts on Pablo Escobar? I guess it is. So while I do that, let's take a look at some of the critical or satanic degrees in his chart. So 9 degrees of Sagittarius. Let's see. Actually, that's not the one I want to start with. I want to start with, oh yeah, it is the one I want to start with. I was going to start with the 0 to 1, but I want to talk about the 9 degrees of Sagittarius. So having a planet at the 9 degrees of Sagittarius, because this is one of the most prominent things that show you who he was, and it can really be seen in his life and the things that he did. So when you have a planet at 9 degrees of Sagittarius, and I'm going to skip the wheel for a minute, guys, so you can see what I'm talking about. But his sun. So a lot of astrologers, they'll tell you, a lot of people say the sun is the most important planet in the chart. You know, its rays, you know, nothing's brighter than the sun. So his rays cast far and wide, and his energy is very strong and powerful. So I found that it's absolutely predictive of this characteristic about him that was who he was. The fact that he had, of all planets to have at 9 degrees of Sagittarius, he had his sun at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. And listen to when I read these off to you how many warrior degrees that he had. So he had his sun at 9 degrees of Sagittarius, and according to the critical and satanic degrees, 9 degrees of Sagittarius is a warrior degree, and is also a degree of homicide. Prominent planets on this degree are also seen in the charts of religious and spiritual reformers. Now, this man it's a degree of homicide. He killed a lot of people. They're estimating he killed about 4,000 or so people, men, women, and children. And when you talk about, it also says prominent planets. The sun, as I said, some consider the most prominent planet in the chart. So it's definitely a prominent planet that's on this 9 degrees. It says are also seen in the charts of religious and spiritual reformers. Pablo having Pisces on his ascendant Again, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Traditional rule is Jupiter. Jupiter represents the higher spirituality. It's like that higher octave of Sagittarius. You know, it's that higher octave, that higher wisdom. It's not knowledge, it's wisdom. And then they had that stellium and Sagittarius. There was something very religious about the work that he did. He saw himself as a great man. I believe there was something very religious and spiritual. When I say religious and spiritual, I'm not talking about somebody that's necessarily into Christianity or Santa Maria. I'm talking about a person's own beliefs, their own wisdoms, their higher beliefs, not what we understand down here as man-made that can be given to you through a Bible or a book, but what's actually speaking to a person from their soul. And I believe he believed religiously in his soul that what he was doing was good for his people and his country overall. So that's why I wanted to point out that planet that is at 9 degrees and 10 minutes of Sagittarius in that critical satanic degree first. Then you have 0 degrees. So planets that are at 0 to 1 degree, 1 or 2 degrees of any sign represent something, you know, major. It means something. It's a big deal in that person's life, and it's long lasting. Pablo has his Jupiter at 0 degrees of Aquarius. His reign as a drug dealer, as a billionaire, at the heights and the levels that he was, it lasted for a long time. And I'll read you what it says about 0 degrees. 0 to 1 degrees of the other fixed signs, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, are long lasting. Fixed signs signify permanence, stability, and things that last. In predictive astrology, what has begun will more than likely last. So that Jupiter and his business dealings sitting there in the 11th house, and his relationships lasted for a long time. His reign as the biggest drug dealer, you know, the head of the Medellin cartel, lasted for a long time, and he is infamous. His name has gone down in history. I believe Pablo Escobar, he was killed, or some say it was a self-inflicted wound, but he was killed in 1993, and it is today 2019, and we are still talking about Pablo Escobar. Narcos came out maybe last year or a couple of years ago. So that goes to show you how much Jupiter and infamy and how his name is spread throughout the world, and how he is a part of history. So that's definitely prominent with that Jupiter there at the 0 degrees of Aquarius. Then the next degree that was interesting was 13 degrees of Aries, the cardinal sign. So he has his north node at 13 degrees and 42 minutes of Aries, as you see here. 13 degrees of Aries. Let me get to it. Why did I go that far down? All right. So where is it? 13 and 26 degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn give special importance to the planet or house cusp occupying the degree. The affairs ruled by the planets, the affairs ruled by the houses ruled by the planets, or by the houses these degrees are on point to something of the above mentioned occurring in the life of the chart owner. So it's very, very interesting how he has his north node at 13 degrees of Aries in his second house. And as you heard, the planets that occupy the house, those house cusp. So not just the planets, the fact that that Aries, the sign and the house cusp are in Aries, and that is on his second house that deals with money, wealth, self-worth. I mean, you know, just money. Again, he was one of the richest men in the world. I don't think and also Aries, guns, military, firepower, hot temper. It all can be seen there with that 13 degrees north node in Aries. Next, we have Pluto at 15 degrees. Well, we're going to talk about 15 degrees. Pluto isn't at 15 degrees of Leo. It's 3 degrees off. But I still want to talk about it because I believe it could play a part. It's open to interpretation. Pluto at 18 degrees. So he has Pluto at 18 degrees. Pluto is a lot of power. If you think about Scorpio, it's very powerful. And that's the reason why, although his Pluto is not at 15 and it's not making a 1 to 2 degree conjunction, it's making a 3 degree and 9-minute conjunction to 15 degrees of Leo. I believe Pluto's influence can be so strong that this is playing a part into who Pablo Escobar is. So the 15 degrees of Leo is one of the, and because the 15 degrees of Leo is so strong of a degree, that's why I'm going to take this into consideration with his Pluto at 18 degrees of Leo. So 15 degrees of Leo is one of the worst degrees in the zodiac, either natally or in prediction. Prominent in the charts of serial killers, felons serving life sentences, and his life sentence was death. They killed him. They didn't want to take him alive. So they knew when they were going to get Pablo, he was going to be dead. They were not looking to take Pablo alive. And you can see that in Narcos. Prominent in the charts of serial killers, felons serving life sentences, and in the charts of those who had fated hard luck. Helen Keller, both blind and deaf from a very early age, had her co-ruler Mars at 15 degrees of Leo, along with no air signs. Air signs are communication. Stevie Wonder, blind, had Pluto at 15 degrees of Leo. Ludwig van Beethoven, who was deaf, had his Saturn at 15 degrees of Leo. So you can see how prominent that can be and how that can affect somebody. So those were the satanic or critical degrees that I felt really stuck out. And now I'm just going to run through his, because I want to show you his connection with the military. I'm just going to run through a few of his fixed stars. So Antares is at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. 1 second. So Antares is a fixed star, which is at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. He has his sun basically right on top of this fixed star at 9 degrees of Sagittarius. So 1 second. Let's see. And those are some of the most prominent. I mean, they are the 4 prominent fixed stars are Aldebaran, Regulus, Antares, and Fomalhaut. So 1 second, and that's in Sagittarius. So let me just go down to Sagittarius so I can tell you. And these get more specific. I mean, for the fixed stars, you really want to look at specifics of the planets that are with those fixed stars to see how they play out even more. But for the sake of time, and I really don't have all the time to do that right now, we're just going to talk about the fact that his sun is sitting right there on top of Antares. And it says Antares is the watcher of the West. The nature can be impulsive, headstrong, stubborn, and courageous. He was all of those things. The life meets with unpredictable events, unexpected upsets and changes, and a loss of success can come from self-undoing. Please, if you're interested in Pablo Escobar at all, and what's really funny is, I would turn my camera on and face it towards me, but I can't afford this video cutting off after almost 2 hours. And I may chop this up and release this in a part 1 and part 2. But I'm holding a book in my hand right now, and I'm so mad because where is the cover? I have loaned this book out. So many people have read it. I read this thing so long ago. I'm going to have to read it all over again because honestly, you guys, I read about Pablo a long time ago. I'm holding in my hands The King of Cocaine. Kings of Cocaine. So Kings of Cocaine is a really, really, really good book. It's by Guy Gugliotta and Jeff Lean. Those are probably the 2 DEA agents who worked on the case. You know, they say the book is better than the movie. Kings of Cocaine book is probably better than Narcos or any other movie they've made on Pablo. But I'm going to be really honest with you guys. I'm in my 30s. When I read Kings of Cocaine, I was either a teenager or in my 20s. So I cannot even tell you anything that I read or that I remember from this book. But it has pictures. It has pictures of Pablo Escobar in this book. I mean, it just goes through a lot of that stuff. It talks about Barry Seal, smuggler, you know, turned DEA informant. I mean, there's just a lot of, I believe it talks about Griselda Blanco. So if you want a really, really interesting read, pick up The Kings of Cocaine by Guy, was this Gigliotta and Jeff Lean. The book is taped together. That's how many times that book has been read. So just to show, you know, these things with this Uncharted are really true. Lots of unpredicted events, and his downfall, his loss of his success and money came from his undoing. If you watch Narcos, it was his stubbornness. It was his unwillingness to take no for an answer and to reason. When he wanted something, he wanted something, and that eventually led to his undoing. Also with the sun conjunct on Taurus, it says there is a military and martial aptitude bringing honor and favors. There is a warrior. This is a warrior star. Again, warrior and military. He was not a part of the official military, but he was everything of a warrior and militant. Those who have this star prominent in their charts often rebel against spiritual and religious oppression, bringing drastic changes in these areas. And I interpret that as rebelling against the status quo, rebelling against the government. Spiritual and religious things represent institutions. They represent the church. You know, they represent the church of the government, the institution of the government. So as to not be so literal, he is the biggest, he led the biggest rebellion against the Colombian government. So then we had, and also 9 degrees. Also, he has his ascendant at 3 degrees and 4 degrees and 9 minutes of Pisces. And Formahalt is at 3 degrees of Pisces. So he's in a one degree conjunction, his ascendant. And again, those are important planets that we just discussed. The sun in Antares, and then the ascendant in Formahalt. So he has his sun within 1 degrees of Formahalt, which is at 4 degrees. So that's going to be pretty strong. I mean, he has his ascendant there, which is going to be pretty strong. So 3 degrees of Pisces is Formahalt. It's known as the Watcher of the South. These are the most powerful fixed stars. Again, Antares and Formahalt are part of the Regulus, and Aldebaran are the most powerful fixed stars. His ascendant is in conjunction with Formahalt, and it says Formahalt is the Watcher of the South. The effects of this star can be variable, for better or for worse. The star can bring success and financial wealth, one of the richest men in the world, but there is often very hard work along with plenty of responsibility. And being a drug trafficker is not easy. People will say, oh, well, selling drugs is the easy way out. Well, I don't think anything where you put your life on the line to get killed and shot up and taken to jail for the damn near the rest of your natural born life is easy. So I beg to differ. So yes, his life was definitely not easy. I'm sure he had many, many worries that were associated with his line of business. And a lot of responsibility being the head of the Medellin cartel. And it says it can increase and amplify whatever planet it conjuncts. So it's conjunct his ascendant. So just increasing his stubbornness, increasing his whole personality, increasing that Pisces evasiveness, being able to get away and be the biggest drug trafficker under a lot of people's noses until he became well known for doing that. And guys, I have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh my God. 6, 7. Oh my God. I got too many damn fixed stars, and we at 2 hours, so it's a wrap, guys. I am not gonna go through all this fixed stars. If you guys want a part 2, let me know. I think I just want to talk about 1 or 2 fixed stars because they're pretty prominent. Let me see. I wanted to talk about Rigel because that's where Saturn is. Let's see. Why is my stupid ass phone? Let me see. It's in Virgo. Hold up. Virgo, Saturn, 18 degrees Virgo. Yeah, let's talk about what he has in Virgo. So in Virgo, he has the nebula, because in Virgo he has, also looking at some of the oppositions as well to this. So he has Mars in 19 degrees of Virgo and Saturn in 19 degrees of Virgo. So as far as Saturn, it's within 2 degrees of the fixed star Denebula. Denebula. And that fixed star can bring honors and wealth, impulsiveness, disgrace, regrets, and misfortunes through natural forces. So those things definitely applied to him, the honors and wealth and the disgrace. He was disgraced in the worst way, who was doing all these good things, and you know, put on a business in. So, right, 1 second. Let's just talk about a few more. Again, the military one that I wanted to pull out, the military one, Bellatrix is at 20 degrees Gemini. He has Mars at 19 degrees of Virgo, so it's making a 1 degree opposition from Bellatrix that's in Gemini. And Bellatrix brings... Wait a second, guys. Okay. Sorry, guys. My screen recording stopped. I had it set on a maximum of two hours, so we timed out. But we were talking about Capella. It says it brings honors and riches, also followed by squander and waste, leading to ruin. The personality can be eccentric and unusual in certain in some way. And I gotta look up this word ecclesiastical. Let me look that up. I've heard that word pronounced and I'm butchering it now, but I just want to look up the definition really quick. And he was definitely led to squander and ruin. He was definitely eccentric in his way. I mean, 7,000, foot or acre or whatever it was, property with animals and hippopotamuses roaming it, just showed you how big of a compound that he lived on, and how eccentric that his personality was in that way. So let's just look up the definition of this word, and I'll get the pronunciation right, because it's going to give me the I forgot when it's called, where they spell a word out so you can know how to pronounce it. So ECCLESIASTICAL. Ecclesiastical? I don't know. We're about to see in a second. Oh, yeah. Ecclesiastical. I don't know why I couldn't pronounce that looking at it. I needed the phonetic spelling of that. The ecclesiastical.
Ecclesiastical.
There you go. And the definition of that is relating to the Christian church or its clergy. And I told you that he gave money to the church. He gave money to the people in the neighborhood and stuff like that. So that's one that really does pertain to him too. So I just want to talk about 2 more of the fixed stars, because they really do have to do with who he is. His Saturn and his Mars. Let's talk about Rigel, which is at 16 degrees of Gemini. His Saturn is in a 2 degrees opposition with Rigel, because his Saturn is at 18 degrees, as you guys see here, 18 degrees of Virgo. So it's in a 2 degree opposition, and the oppositions you count. Rigel gives lasting riches, honors, and favor. When prominent, it is good for military careers. Again, the military, especially if in conjunction with the midhaven. It wasn't in conjunction with his midhaven, so it didn't turn out too well with him. And mechanical ability. He was very good at getting things in mechanical vehicles and modes of transportation across the country. I mean, out of the country, to traffic and smuggle his drugs. There's a teaching ability, and the personality is somewhat conforming. Ambitious and hardworking. These people can stay on top as long as the effort is maintained. No need to repeat myself, guys. I'm psychic. I already told you. He was hardworking. He stayed on top. He was on top as one of the richest men and most successful drug dealers for a long time. Drug traffickers for a long time. And then let's just talk about Pollux and his Venus. 1 second. So Pollux is at 23 degrees of Cancer, and his Venus is at 25 degrees of Capricorn, almost 26 degrees. So that's making a 2-degree opposition to Pollux. And Pollux gives athletic ability and is favorable for martial arts, boxers, fighters, and warriors. There goes that military and warrior spirit again. This star is bad for eyesight. So Pablo may have had some eyesight issues. Did not know him to wear glasses. I'm not sure if he ever wore them, but I see several things that could point to maybe his eyesight wasn't the greatest, and can bring injury to the eyes and face. There could be connections with poisons. Honors are often followed by disgrace, and he was definitely disgraced, and possible imprisonment. He was definitely imprisoned, even though his imprisonment was more like luxury. There can be cruel, subtle, and scheme in nature, and we all know he was cruel, murdering 4,000 people. There was an air of devil, Satanism, and cruelty to Pablo Escobar because he didn't have any problem murdering all of those people, and definitely a scheming and subtle, like subtle meaning under the radar, not loud, not all in your face, like I talked about being at Pisces. There's a certain air of subtleness and of course scheming in his nature. How else would you be a successful drug dealer and trafficker for all that time? And the last one I'm gonna talk about, God, see, he has so many good ones. Did we talk about Formahawk and Regulus? Let me see, did we talk about those? I hope we did. Because he has some other ones. Yeah. Oh, we got to talk about Formahawk because his Uranus is at 3 degrees Cancer. And he has Formahawk. I'm sorry, guys. His ascendant is at 4 degrees Pisces. And Formahawk is at 3 degrees of Pisces. I read that one. Better or worse, it can bring success and financial wealth, but very hard, plenty of responsibility. We did that. And did we do Regulus? Let me see. I got for his Regulus Aquarius, so that's either going to be in Leo or Aquarius. 1 second. Let me just find it so I can read it to you guys. Must be. Oh. He has Gedi, which is 2 degrees into Aquarius. He has that Jupiter at 0 degrees Aquarius. Gedi, what happens in a native's life. Sacrifices are often made, and strange events occur in this life. There is much suspicion and mistrust. His life was all about sneaking things and being under suspicion and not trusted. And I stated before that I felt that he probably felt like that because of some of the placements in his charts that we talked about. That stuff over there in Virgo specifically, and some other placements, that he probably wasn't that trusting of a lot of the people that was close to him in his cohorts. And there was a time in his life where he felt like he couldn't trust a lot of people. So that was that. And let me just look for this last one. I think I might have read Regulus. Okay, I don't know if I read Regulus, but we can read Regulus. So Regulus is at 29 degrees. He has 29 degrees of Leo. He has that Jupiter in 0 degrees of Aquarius, which is making less than a 1 degree conjunction. And Regulus is the watcher of the north, astrological ability, independent and high-spirited. There can be destructive tendencies and military honors. I might have read this, guys, but I'm just going to read it again real quick. These people often obtain positions of power along with success and have leadership ability. There is also the possibility of disgrace and a disastrous fall from a prominent position. And I think that about sums up his life. The possibility of disgrace and disastrous fall from a prominent position. And he was one of the most prominent people of our time when it comes to drug trafficking and money, and being one of the richest people in the world. So, and I won't stop saying it because it's there's a lot of people that live and die and you've never heard their name. So I'm not glorifying him, but I'm saying like it's something to be talked about and really realized for what it is. So let's look at 29. And I think what I may do is sprinkle these through the video instead of making you guys wait until the end for these 29 facts about Pablo Escobar. Oh my gosh, this is killing me because it keeps giving me that page. And I hate like when you go to a website and they have all of these advertisements and shit. Okay, guys, and I may be sounding low energy because we've been on here for over 2 hours, but we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And let's talk about 29 facts about Pablo Escobar. So, come on. The first fact is Escobar was, well, this is what they say. Escobar was responsible for killing about 4,000 people, including an estimated 200 judges, 1,000 police workers, journalists, and government officials. So you see how heavy his connection was to judges and all of that, and killing, having no love, like we talked about that Venus and Capricorn. What's number 2? What's number 1? Number 1, I skipped it. At his extravagant estate in Puerto Triunfo, Escobar also built a private zoo filled with hippos, giraffes, elephants, and other animals. Hippos still roam the ground today. And this is just like, it's old and worn now, but this is just a little bit of a picture of it. I'm going to close this. Oh my gosh. Y'all, this thing don't want me to show you. Okay. Number 3, in the 1980s, it's Pablo. In the 1980s, Escobar's Medellin cartel was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that was sent to the United States. Before getting into the drug trade, Escobar sold stolen tombstones to smugglers and was also in the business of stealing cars. Number 5, Pablo Escobar was born in Rio Negro, Colombia in 1949. His father was a farmer and his mother was a school teacher. In 1976, a 27-year-old Pablo Escobar married Maria Victoria Henao Vallejo, who was then 15. That's very Sagittarian opposite Gemini of him to go for someone younger. While the Escobar family, and very controlling, I said Sagittarius wants to control, who better than control someone more than 10 years younger than you? It said he was 27 and she was 15, right? 12 years younger. If that isn't control, I don't know what is. While the Escobar family was hiding, Pablo's daughter, Manuela, got sick. To keep her warm, Escobar burned about $2 million. Rich, rich, rich. Skip. Let's take a drink of juice. Pablo Escobar bought a Lear jet specifically for flying his cash. So not for transporting his drugs, but he needed a jet just for his cash. Ain't that something? Escobar is said to have smuggled cocaine into plane tires. Pending how much product pilots flew, they could earn as much as $500,000 per day. Wow. In an attempt to change the laws of extradition, Escobar offered to pay Colombia's debt, $10 million. So I don't know if he was trying to pay the debt off. I guess he was trying to pay the debt off that we had Colombia may have had to the United States or whatever countries Colombia owed, so they could change the extradition laws, because they say Pablo's biggest fear was being extradited to America. He did not want to end up in a United States jail cell. Escobar spent around $2,500 a month on rubber bands used to hold his money. $2,500 to $100 a month on rubber bands. Escobar's earnings peaked at an estimated $30 billion. So he was making billions per year. I think earlier I said he was making like double digits billions per year, but I think he was making like in the upwards of billions per year. Escobar made the Forbes billionaires list of the world's richest people 7 years in a row, beginning in 1987, and peaked at number 7 in 1989. And this looks like a page from that write-up in Forbes about Pablo Escobar. In the late 1980s, Colombian authorities seized some of Escobar's enormous fleet, including 142 planes, 20 helicopters, 30 yachts, and 141 homes and offices. This man was the president. He might have not been the official president, but this man was the president of Colombia. Believe you me. Excuse me. Escobar's business was so big and so scrutinized that, in addition to planes, helicopters, cars, trucks, and boats, he even bought 2 submarines for transporting his cocaine into the U.S. And guys, I didn't even have time to really get into aspects. We just talked about placements and what's going on that leads to his personal character. But not even aspects can tell you more about events happening in somebody's life. If you guys are interested, we'll come back and do that. But I think I gave you enough in this. Number 16, at the height of the drug trade, Escobar smuggled up to 15 tons of cocaine each day. Pablo Escobar supported the poor, earned him the nickname Robin Hood. See his little stocky little Pisces self. And you know, they say fish can have dual personalities, swim in 2 different directions. That's why I call him the illusionist, that Pisces and Neptune. Number 18. Other popular nicknames for Escobar were Don Pablo and El Patron. I like me some Patron drink as well. Among the possessions that authorities found at Escobar's home was a Spanish translation of the self-help classic, The Power of Positive Thinking. And I've been saying I need to get some self-help books, but I'm damn sure going to get The Power of Positive Thinking, goddammit. Pablo was reading it. About 10% of Escobar's earnings were lost to spoilage. Rats likely consumed a bulk of those bills. Wow. Skip. Escobar's luxury prison was referred to as La Catedral, aka the Cathedral. His prison was a luxury getaway. His prison was a vacation. His prison was not prison at all. La Cathedral housed a casino, a nightclub, and even a spa. This is when he turned himself into the Colombian authorities, guys, and was supposed to be in jail. That was the jail he built for himself. Following his death, Escobar's lavish Colombian estate was transformed into a theme park featuring animals, life-size dinosaur models, Escobar's collection of classic cars, and more. So you guys see that even though it was something negative and the Colombian government, along with the American government, took him down, you see how he's still revered and still sort of praised in Colombia? Pablo Escobar, let me move this so I can see. Pablo Escobar's greatest fear was extradition. No matter what happened, he didn't want to spend his final years in an American jail cell. How fitting of a Pisces being ruled by Neptune. Doesn't he look like a Pisces there? That face. Oh. Despite his horrific business dealings, Escobar did fund a number of programs to help Colombia's poor residents. He gave money to churches and hospitals, how fitting of a Pisces, established food programs, built parks and football stadiums, and created a barrio. How fitting of a Sag and a Pisces. Escobar used his extraordinary wealth and popularity to get himself elected to Colombia's Congress. He's a member of Congress, guys. The biggest single cocaine shipment Escobar ever made to the United States weighed a whopping 51,000 pounds. Pablo Escobar was gunned down at the age of 44. Some people speculate that the wound was self-inflicted. And I believe this is on the rooftop of where he was gunned down. I think this is the actual picture. About 25,000 people, including many of the poor Colombians to whom Escobar had personally distributed money, attended his burial in Medellin. I think at one time he was funding the soccer team and everything. And that was it, guys. I truly hope you enjoyed this video. I have to think of a way to not make these so in the future. I hope you guys stuck with me to the end. There's a lot of interesting information. I think you could learn a lot about yourself as a sign, as we talked about a lot of the different signs and planets in this video. Leave me a comment below. Let's discuss Pablo Escobar. Let's discuss the signs, and let's discuss the planets. Let's discuss what you guys want to discuss in relation to this video, and any comments and thoughts you have on Pablo Escobar. Shout out to all the Sagittarius. Shout out and happy birthday to all the Geminis, which is Sagittarius' opposite sign out there. Happy birthday. And you know who got next, the best sign of them all, Cancer. So we'll have to do like OJ Simpson. We'll have to do somebody for Cancer month. Somebody really good. Little Kim, OJ, 50 Cent. We'll have to do somebody good for Cancer season. But again, we're going to do Margaret Sanger. Maybe I'll save Big Meech. Maybe Big Meech will be Cancer season. So we'll see. And like I said, that will probably be the next video. So I'll probably say Big Meech for Cancer season since he is a Gemini Cancer cusp. Love you guys. This is Madam X. I'm up out of here. Thank you for listening to Frequency Radio. Have a good Memorial Day. Peace.